He sat in chains, mocked by crooked cops, until a woman in a blue suit walked in and said 5 words that froze the courtroom. "I run the FBI task force." The judge turned pale. The officers stopped smiling. But what she revealed next changed everything. Let's start from the beginning. Applause for injustice. The courtroom was unusually noisy for a sentencing hearing. There was no solemn atmosphere, no sense of dignity, just tension and arrogance. 4 uniformed officers lounged in the front row, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. Deputy Greer, the loudest of them, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Told you this would be easy," he whispered to Officer Lanning, who let out a low chuckle. "Guy thought he could mess with us. Should have stayed quiet." At the center of it all sat Elijah Barnes, his wrists shackled, eyes hollow. His once proud posture had withered over the past 6 weeks of his trial. His public defender, a tired-looking man with a stack of worn folders, avoided eye contact with him. There was nothing left to say. The jury had spoken. The judge, well, he'd barely pretended to be impartial. Elijah, a 28-year-old community social worker, had been charged with obstruction of justice and assault on an officer. The reality: he had filmed these same 4 officers beating a homeless veteran behind the food pantry where Elijah volunteered. When he tried to intervene, unarmed, nonviolent, they turned on him. Days later, he was arrested. And when the edited footage hit the courtroom, it told a different story. The prosecution painted Elijah as an agitator, a manipulator, even a danger to public servants. His social work degree was called a shield for subversion. And the courtroom? It believed every word. Judge Harold Kessler, known for his no-nonsense style, had barely looked up during the defense's closing arguments. He sipped water and nodded as if already writing the verdict in his head. Every objection from Elijah's lawyer had been overruled, every delay request denied. The cops, meanwhile, were the stars of the show. They joked, laughed, and exchanged grins as the judge prepared his final remarks. "You ever seen someone crumble like that?" Officer Brandt murmured, eyes on Elijah. "Guy looked like he wanted to disappear." Deputy Greer laughed. "He will. County prison's going to make sure of it." Behind them, the gallery was packed with local media, curious spectators, and a few activists who had quietly held Elijah's hand through the ordeal. But their optimism was dying. The system was swallowing him whole. The judge lifted his gavel. "This court," he began, his tone slow and final, "is prepared to issue sentencing for the defendant, Mr. Elijah Barnes." Then the courtroom doors creaked open. The noise was small, but it silenced the room. A woman stepped in, tall, poised, mid-30s, wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit and carrying a black leather briefcase. She walked with the unshakable calm of someone who belonged, despite being a stranger to everyone present. She approached the bailiff. Her voice was measured but clear. "I'm requesting emergency intervention under federal authority." The room blinked. Murmurs rippled through the audience. The judge squinted down at her over his glasses. "Excuse me," he said, frowning. "Who do you think you are, walking in like that during sentencing?" The woman turned to face the room, her gaze sweeping across the smug faces of the officers, the confused judge, the weary defendant in chains. Then she said the words that detonated everything. "I run the FBI's Internal Corruption Task Force." The courtroom went still. Greer's jaw slackened. Kessler blinked rapidly, his gavel halfway raised. "I'm Agent Dana Wolf," she continued, "and this court has been under covert surveillance for the past 8 months." Panic hit like a wave. Elijah, shackled at the defense table, looked up, eyes wide, breath caught in his throat. He didn't dare believe it. The judge laughed nervously. This is a joke. I don't know what department sent you, but this is my courtroom. Dana didn't blink. Your courtroom is about to be reviewed by federal investigators. Your decisions, your affiliations, your rulings, every one of them. She handed a sealed file to the bailiff. Exhibit A through G, verified wiretaps, unedited surveillance footage, falsified reports from these 4 officers. She nodded to the seated cops, now frozen in place. Officer Greer tried to speak. This is ridiculous. We followed protocol. You followed a script, Dana cut in coldly. One you rehearsed to protect yourselves and target a man who did nothing wrong. You used power to silence truth. You weaponized the law to protect brutality. The room was vibrating with tension. Judge Kessler stood up now, his voice rising. You don't have the authority to barge into my courtroom. Dana stepped forward. Actually, I do. The moment this case was tied to known officers already under federal investigation, this courtroom fell under FBI jurisdiction. And you, Your Honor, are part of that investigation. That last sentence dropped like a guillotine. Gasps broke out. Reporters scrambled for their phones. A few older jurors exchanged glances as if trying to decide whether to run or stay seated. Elijah sat still, his heart hammering in his chest. For weeks, he had been treated like a criminal, painted as a liar. Now, with just a few sentences, the power in the room had shifted. The bailiff looked nervously at Dana, then at the judge, then back again. What do you want us to do? Dana turned to Elijah. Unchain him, she said simply. He's not the criminal here. The bailiff hesitated for only a second before stepping forward and unlocking Elijah's cuffs. The sound of metal falling to the floor was deafening in the silence. The 4 officers stared in stunned disbelief. Dana faced them. You may want to call your union reps. You're going to need them. Officer Brandt muttered under his breath. We need to leave, now. But the exits were already covered. 2 federal agents entered through the same doors Dana had used, badges raised, and as the scene unfolded, a single thought echoed through every mind in the room. What the hell is happening, and what is she going to reveal next? The case reopens. The courtroom, moments ago buzzing with cocky laughter and self-assured sneers, had turned into a vacuum of fear and disbelief. Deputy Greer, once the loudest in the room, now sat stiff, his lips pressed into a thin line. The smirk was gone. In its place, sweat on his brow and twitching fingers. Judge Kessler hadn't moved. He remained frozen behind his bench, eyes darting between the 2 federal agents who now flanked the courtroom door like sentries. One of them had already begun quietly locking it from the inside. Agent Dana Wolf, standing alone at the center of the storm she had just unleashed, spoke again, this time directly to the court clerk. Record states, emergency federal intervention. Immediate review of all evidence, testimony, and conduct associated with case number JX4219. The State versus Elijah Barnes. She placed a thick folder on the prosecution's table. The sound echoed like thunder. I'm submitting new primary evidence, previously suppressed by local law enforcement. She looked pointedly at the 4 officers. And intentionally omitted by key witnesses under oath. Greer finally snapped. You can't just barge in here and start making accusations. Dana didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Deputy Greer, your voice was already loud enough on the wire. She tapped the folder. We have recorded conversations from your cruiser's internal mic. You were unaware it had been reactivated remotely the week prior. You and Officers Lanning, Brandt, and Silva discussed how you would edit body cam footage, disable timestamps, and fabricate a resisting arrest narrative. Gasps swept through the audience like a wave of electricity. One of the reporters dropped his notepad. A woman in the back whispered, They really did it. Dana continued, her tone surgically precise. You said, and I quote, "He's just a community worker. Got no backing. We say he lunged at us. No one's going to question that. One less problem in the district." The transcript pages were passed to the judge. He didn't reach for them. "You're lying," Officer Brandt barked. "This is staged, fabricated by someone trying to take us down." Dana turned toward the wall behind the jury box. With a simple nod, one of the agents pulled down a projector screen. A laptop was placed on the evidence table. Within seconds, video footage began to play. It was the same incident the jury had seen during trial, but now unedited. No cuts, no glitchy audio, just raw, horrifying truth. The screen showed Elijah walking calmly toward the officers, phone in hand, pleading with them to stop beating a man who lay curled in the alley, bleeding and unconscious. Then it showed Officer Greer shoving Elijah into a dumpster, slamming him to the ground, and yelling, "That's obstruction!" The crowd in the courtroom recoiled. The prosecutor, visibly shaken, whispered something to his assistant. A juror in the front row looked sick, but Dana wasn't finished. "The man you assaulted, Robert Dillon, was a Navy vet diagnosed with schizophrenia. He died 2 weeks after this beating from internal hemorrhaging. Medical records show trauma consistent with what's on this video." She paused. "And the worst part? You never filed a report about that incident. You buried it. You made Mr. Barnes your scapegoat to hide the damage." Elijah, now free of his cuffs, could hardly breathe. He sat with both hands pressed against his face, tears pooling at the corners of his eyes. For the first time since his arrest, someone was speaking for him. Dana turned back to Judge Kessler. "There's more." She lifted another folder. "Financial logs, traced bank transfers, phone records, all pointing to a pattern. You, Judge Kessler, have been receiving monthly deposits from a shell company linked to a private police union. These deposits coincide with cases where you've handed down maximum sentences to civilian defendants in police-related cases, including this one." Now it was the judge who turned pale. I don't... This isn't..." he stammered. "This evidence, it hasn't been reviewed." "It has," Dana said firmly. "By our forensics unit, by the Department of Justice, by 3 auditors who have no idea who you are." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. "You've ruled over 200 suppression hearings in the past 5 years. 96% in favor of law enforcement. That's not justice. That's business." Kessler's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. A young woman from the gallery, Elijah's sister, stood up. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "How many others? How many people lost everything because of this?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Dana turned to the court. "This isn't just about Elijah Barnes. This is about every innocent man or woman who stood here and was crushed by a system rigged against them. This is about abuse of power. And today, it stops." The officers were no longer hiding their panic. Lanning had pulled out his phone under the table. Brandt was fidgeting, looking for an exit. "Please remain seated," said one of the FBI agents at the door. "This court is now under federal lockdown." Dana looked at Elijah. He was trembling. "You have something to say?" she asked gently. He stood slowly. His voice was quiet but steady. "I tried to stop them. I tried to do the right thing, and they made me out to be a criminal." He looked toward the jury box, then the gallery. "But I'm not the one you should be afraid of." A silence followed, heavy and charged. Then Dana said with finality, "Starting today, this courtroom belongs to the people again." The turn. For a moment, there was silence so deep it felt like the whole room had stopped breathing. Then the shift began. Elijah Barnes, now standing in the middle of the courtroom, no longer looked like the broken man who had been dragged through 6 weeks of humiliation. The tears on his face were real, but so byl I ogon w glazach. He looked around, not with fear, but with a strange calm. It was the look of a man who had survived the worst the system had to offer, and was still standing. Agent Dana Wolf stepped beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. The simple gesture struck the audience harder than any speech. In that moment, Elijah wasn't just a wrongfully accused man. He was a symbol of everyone the system had tried to silence. Judge Kessler, whose once commanding presence now seemed paper-thin, tried to steady his voice. This is all highly irregular," he stammered, clutching the bench as if it might anchor him to power he no longer held. "There are procedures, rules." Dana didn't let him finish. "You broke those rules, Your Honor, and you did it for profit, for protection, for control." She turned toward the gallery, her voice rising. "This is what systemic corruption looks like, when justice becomes a game played behind closed doors, when power is traded like currency, and when those with the loudest voices silence the truth until it's too late." The audience, previously restrained by courtroom decorum, began to murmur, then speak louder. Some stood, others cried, a few yelled outright. "How long? How many others? They need to pay." The 4 officers sat rigid. Greer wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. Lanning leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something in a panic. But Donna wasn't done. "There's one more thing," she said. She held up a slim USB drive. "This contains audio logs pulled from an internal affairs archive that was hidden from federal databases. Buried. These files name not only the 4 officers on trial today, but 3 more active-duty deputies and a private investigator, hired to intimidate witnesses in police brutality cases." She inserted the drive into the laptop. "You all remember the witness who recanted testimony during week 2 of this trial?" she asked, looking around the room. "A woman named Selena Voss. She worked across the street and saw everything. She was ready to testify until someone paid her a visit." She pressed play. A grainy audio file began, filled with faint background noise, birds, traffic, and then a man's voice. "If you testify, we can't protect you. Think of your kids. You don't want trouble, do you?" Another voice, Selena's, shaky, terrified. "You don't scare me. I already told the truth." Then a pause. A door slams. The first voice again. "Then you just became part of the problem." The audio ended. Shock and fury swelled in the room like a storm cloud about to burst. This wasn't just about Elijah. This was about every silenced voice, every manipulated witness, every story that had been buried beneath fear and threats. One of the jurors, a middle-aged woman in a red cardigan, stood up and addressed the judge directly. "I voted guilty because I believed the video. I trusted what I saw, and now I know I was used. You lied to all of us." Elijah watched her, stunned. Another juror followed. Then another. Dana nodded toward the clerk. "Motion for immediate dismissal of verdict and declaration of mistrial has been submitted to the circuit. Under emergency federal authority, the original ruling is hereby vacated." The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, but in vindication. Some clapped, some cried. Elijah's mother, seated in the back with a trembling hand over her mouth, whispered through tears, "He's coming home." But Dana wasn't smiling. Not yet. She turned her eyes back to Judge Kessler. "You, sir, are being charged under the Federal Ethics and Judicial Integrity Act, Title 18. You are to be placed under investigation for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and abuse of power." 2 agents moved toward the bench. Kessler backed up, wild-eyed. "You can't do this. This is unconstitutional. This is my court." Dana took a step closer. "No. It was never yours. It belongs to the people." The agents took him by the arms, pulling him from behind the bench. A man who once towered over every defendant now looked small, dragging his heels, protesting like a child denied dessert. The audience, stunned, watched as the symbol of their city's justice system was led away in handcuffs. It was then that Elijah turned to Dana, his voice shaking. "Why me?" he asked. "Why did you choose this case? I'm just some guy who tried to help." Dana looked at him for a long moment, then answered with steel in her voice. "Because they underestimated you, and that made them sloppy. But you did the right thing even when no one was watching. That's not just brave, that's rare." Outside, reporters scrambled. News trucks flooded the front steps of the courthouse. Headlines were already forming. FBI shuts down corrupt trial. Judge and officers indicted. Innocent man freed in federal raid on local court. Elijah Barnes' case sparks nationwide investigation. But inside the courtroom, Elijah remained quiet. The chains were gone. His name was cleared, and justice for once had a face. The aftermath. The sun had begun to set over Jackson County Courthouse by the time Elijah stepped outside. For a moment, everything felt too bright, too loud. The shouts of reporters, the flashing of cameras, the rush of questions. It all blurred into a hum. He stood still on the courthouse steps, clutching a manila folder Dana Wolfe had handed him before they left the courtroom. Inside were three things: his full exoneration order, a contact card for a federal trauma support group, and a handwritten note. "You stood for truth when no one else would. Don't let this be the end of your story. Let it be the beginning." Dana Wolfe. He hadn't spoken a word since the hearing ended. "Eli!" a voice called. His mother broke through the crowd, arms outstretched. He didn't wait. He ran to her like he had when he was 10 and scared of thunderstorms. They clung to each other, shaking, crying, not out of fear this time, but out of a release too big for words. "You're free," she whispered into his ear. "They tried to destroy you, but you're free." He looked up to see his sister behind her, holding a cardboard sign she'd made during the trial. It read, in uneven handwriting, "Justice for Elijah. Justice for all." Around them, supporters gathered. Some were strangers who had followed his story online. Others were families of people who had been similarly silenced, some still waiting for their own justice. There were veterans, mothers, teachers, former defendants. One by one, they came to him, shaking his hand, hugging him, thanking him. But Elijah wasn't sure he deserved thanks. Not yet. Inside the courthouse, Judge Kessler was being processed and fingerprinted. A cell awaited him in the same holding area Elijah had occupied for nearly a week before trial. A quiet, poetic justice. The four officers, Greer, Lanning, Brandt, and Silva, sat handcuffed in a separate chamber. Their badges had been stripped, their weapons confiscated, their pension benefits frozen pending federal trial. Greer, who once laughed as Elijah was shoved into a van, now sat staring at the wall, eyes red and wide. Reporters tried to get statements. None came. But the true storm had already begun. Within hours of Dana Wolfe's declaration, headlines lit up every major news outlet. Corrupt officers exposed in FBI sting, entire Jackson County legal system under federal review. Social worker wrongfully accused, now symbol of national reform movement. Secret FBI operation unmasks deep systemic abuse in local courts. A video clip of Dana's confrontation with Judge Kessler went viral. In it, her voice was calm but resolute. "This courtroom belongs to the people again." Those words echoed across social media. By midnight, it was trending. And Elijah? He finally found himself back where it all began, outside the food pantry where he once volunteered. The same place he had filmed the brutal assault. Now it stood as a quiet monument to both injustice and redemption. Dana met him there just before dawn, She didn't wear her blazer this time, just a gray hoodie, hands in her pockets, eyes tired. "You came," he said. "Of course," she replied. "I finish what I start." He hesitated. "Did you know how far this would go?" Dana looked up at the sky before answering. "I knew it would break something. I just didn't know how many cracks were waiting underneath." They stood in silence. Then Dana reached into her coat and handed him a thin file. "Federal Civil Rights Fund is launching a community defense initiative," she said. "They need someone with backbone, someone who knows what it's like to stand up when it's hardest." Elijah opened the folder slowly. Inside were job details: outreach director, justice coordinator, salary, benefits, even a desk in D.C. But none of that mattered as much as the single line in Dana's handwriting at the bottom. "You turned pain into power. That's what leaders do." Elijah didn't say yes. He didn't need to. Dana knew his answer before he did. Behind them, the first rays of sunlight stretched across the cracked sidewalk. Birds chirped. The city that had once closed its eyes to injustice was waking up with something new. Hope. Weeks later, the courtroom where Elijah had nearly been sentenced became the site of the largest legal reform hearing in state history. Judge Kessler faced 18 federal charges. The 4 officers were tried separately, each for obstruction, assault, and conspiracy. But perhaps the greatest shift happened in the people. More came forward. Other victims, other silent witnesses. They stepped into the light, emboldened by one man's refusal to stay quiet. Elijah's story became part of training curriculums for police academies and law schools. His name was written into legislation aimed at making courts more transparent. And somewhere, a mother sat her child down, pointed at a headline and said, "That's Elijah Barnes. He helped bring down men no one thought could be touched. He's proof that even the smallest voice can shake the system." Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about redemption, about reminding the world that truth still matters. And for Elijah, that truth was now louder than anything they had ever tried to silence.